Neuroscientists use the term neural scaffolding to describe how once a brain circuit has been laid out, its connections become strengthened with repeated use, like a scaffold being erected at a building site. Neural scaffolding explains why a behavioral pattern, once it is established, requires effort to change. But with new opportunities, or perhaps just with effort and awareness, we can lay down and strengthen a new track. As Kagan told me about the inhibited children, 70% grow toward health. Temperament may constrain what can be, but it does not determine it. These kids are no longer frightened or hyperreactive. Take as an example one boy, identified as inhibited in infancy, who had learned by his teen years to feel his fear and act anyway. Now no one, he said, realized that he still felt shy. But it took some help and effort and a series of small victories, seemingly using the high road to tame the low. One triumph he remembers was overcoming his fear of shots, which in childhood was so severe that he refused to go to the dentist, until he finally found a dentist who won his trust. Seeing his sister jump into a pool gave him the courage to overcome his own fear of getting water on his face, and so he learned to swim. While at first it took talking to his parents to get over a bad dream, eventually he learned to calm down on his own. "I was able to get over my fears," the formerly worry-bound boy wrote in a school essay. "Because I now understand my predisposition towards anxiety, I can talk myself out of simple fears." And so, with a bit of help, a positive change can occur naturally for many of these inhibited children. The right urging from family or others can help, as can understanding how to manage their own reticence. So does using naturally occurring threats to challenge their inhibited tendencies. Kagan tells of his own granddaughter who was very shy at 6, saying to him, "Make believe I don't know you. I have to practice not being shy." He adds, "Parents don't realize that though biology constrains certain outcomes, it does not determine what can happen." Parenting cannot change every gene, nor modify every neural tic, and yet what children experience day after day sculpts their neural circuitry. Neuroscience has begun to pinpoint with surprising specificity how some of that sculpting operates. Chapter 11. A Secure Base. At 23, he had just graduated from a well-known university. In those days in Britain, a ticket to a successful career. Yet here he was, severely depressed, planning suicide. As he revealed to his psychotherapist, his childhood had been one ongoing misery. The eldest of a large family, he already had 2 younger siblings by the time he reached his 3rd birthday. His parents' frequent quarrels often ended in violence. His father spent much time away from the family for work, and his mother, overwhelmed by the squabbles of her tribe of youngsters, would sometimes lock herself in her bedroom for hours, even days at a time. As a young child, he was left alone to cry for long periods. His parents believed that a child's crying was just an attempt to be spoilt by their attention. He felt that his most basic feelings and needs were ignored. His signature memory from childhood was the night he developed appendicitis and lay awake until dawn, moaning and alone. He also remembers hearing his younger brothers and sisters as they cried themselves to exhaustion, his parents indifferent, and he remembers hating them for it. His first day of school was the most miserable of his life. Being deposited there seemed like the final rejection by his mother. Desperate, he cried the whole day. As his childhood went on, he came to hide all his yearning for love, refusing to ask his parents for anything. During therapy, he was terrified that if he let his feelings into the open and cried, his therapist would see him as an attention-seeking nuisance and, he fantasized, lock himself away in another room until he left. That clinical account was offered by the British psychoanalyst John Bowlby, whose writings on the emotional bonds between parent and child have made him the most influential thinker in child development to emerge from the followers of Freud. Bowlby tackled grand themes in human life like abandonment and loss, and the emotional attachments that make those so powerful. Though trained in the classic patient-on-the-couch mode of psychoanalysis, Bowlby did something revolutionary for his time, roughly from the 1950s on. He, Bowlby, observed mothers and infants directly rather than depending solely on the unverifiable memories of patients in psychoanalysis, and he followed up with those children to see how their early interactions shaped their interpersonal habits. Bowlby identified a healthy attachment to parents as the crucial ingredient in a child's well-being. When parents act with empathy and are responsive to a child's needs, they build a basic sense of security. Such consistent empathy and sensitivity was precisely what that suicidal patient had lacked, and he continued to suffer because he saw his current relationships through the lens of his tragically troubled childhood. Every child, Bowlby argues, needs a preponderance of I-U connections in childhood to thrive throughout life. Well-attuned parents offer a child a secure base, people they can count on when they are upset and need attention, love, and comfort. The notion of attachment and a secure base was elaborated by Bowlby's chief American disciple, the equally influential development theorist Mary Ainsworth. Scores of researchers following her lead have by now accumulated mounds of data and have detected in the subtleties of the earliest parent-infant interactions powerful impacts for whether a child will be secure for life. Virtually from birth, babies are not mere passive lumps, but active communicators seeking their own intensely urgent goals. The two-way emotional message system between a baby and her caretaker represents her lifeline, the route through which passes all the traffic to get her basic needs fulfilled. Babies need to be tiny masters at managing their caretakers through an elaborate, built-in system of eyes contacted and avoided, smiles, and cries. Lacking that social intercom, babies can remain miserable or even die from neglect. Watch a proto-conversation between any mother and her infant, and you will see a finely orchestrated emotional dance, one on which the partners switch taking the lead. As the baby smiles or cries, the mother reacts accordingly. In a very real sense, the emotions of the infant direct what the mother does as much as the mother directs the infant. Their exquisite responsiveness to each other indicates that their loop operates in both directions, a primal emotional highway. This parent-child loop offers the central passageway for parents to help their children learn the ground rules for relationships, how to attend to another person, how to pace an interaction, how to engage in conversation, how to tune into the other person's feelings, and how to manage your own feelings while you are engaged with someone else. These essential lessons lay the foundations for a competent social life. Surprisingly, they also seem to shape intellectual development. The intuitive emotional lessons from the wordless proto-conversation of the first year of life build the mental scaffolding for actual conversations at age 2. And as a child masters the habit of talking, it primes that private inner conversation we call thinking. Research has also found that a secure base does more than provide an emotional cocoon. It seems to nudge the brain to secrete neurotransmitters that add a small bolt of pleasure to that feeling of being well loved, and it does the same for whomever provides that love. Decades after Bowlby and Ainsworth proposed their theories, neuroscientists identified two pleasure-inducing neurotransmitters, oxytocin and endorphins, that are activated by looping. Oxytocin generates a sense of satisfying relaxation. Endorphins mimic the addictive pleasure of heroin in the brain, though not nearly so intensely. For a toddler, parents and family offer this savory security. Playmates and later in life friendships and romantic intimacy activate the same circuits. The systems that secrete these chemicals of nurturing love include familiar parts of the social brain. Injury to the areas with the most oxytocin receptors severely impairs maternal nurturing. The wiring seems largely the same in infants as in their mothers, and also appears to provide some of the neural cement for the loving bond they form. Children who are well nurtured have the sense of a secure base in part because these very brain chemicals evoke the inner sense that everything is all right, possibly the biochemical basis for what Erik Erikson saw as an infant's basic sense of trust in the world. Mothers whose children will grow up to be secure are more attentive and responsive to their baby's cries, more affectionate and tender, and more comfortable in close contact like cuddling. These attuned mothers repeatedly loop with their baby, but those children whose mothers were often out of sync with them display insecurity in either of two flavors. If a mother habitually intrudes, the infant copes by shutting down, actively trying to avoid interactions. When the mother seems uninvolved, the baby reacts with a helpless passivity at being unable to connect, the very pattern brought into his adult life by Bowlby's suicidal patient. Less extreme than outright neglectful mothers are those who create emotional distance with their child, even keeping a physical gap between them, talking to or touching the child relatively little. Such children often display a stiff upper lip pretense of not caring, although in reality their bodies reveal signs of heightened anxiety. These children come to expect that others will be aloof and distant, and so hold back emotionally. As adults, they avoid emotional intimacy, tending to withdraw from people. On the other hand, mothers who are anxious and self-preoccupied tend to be out of tune with their child's needs. When a mother fails to be dependably available and attentive, some infants react by feeling fearful and clingy. These children, in turn, can become absorbed in their own anxieties and so are less able to attune well. In adult relationships, they tend toward anxious clinging. Happy, attuned interactions are as much a basic need for an infant as is feeding or burping. Lacking such synchronous parenting, children are more at risk of growing up with disturbed attachment patterns. In short, well-empathized children tend to become secure. Anxious parenting produces anxious children, and aloof parents produce avoidant children who withdraw from emotion and from people. In adulthood, these patterns will manifest as secure, anxious, or avoidant styles of attachment in relationships. The transmission of these patterns from parent to child appears to be largely through the relationship. For instance, twin studies find that if a secure child gets adopted by an anxious parent, the child will most likely end up sharing that anxious pattern. The attachment style of a parent predicts the child's style with about 70% accuracy. But if an anxious child can find a secure surrogate parent, an older sibling, a teacher, or another relative who does much of the caregiving, her emotional pattern can shift toward the secure. Still face. A mother shares some pleasant moments with her baby when suddenly a subtle change comes over her. The mother's face goes blank and unresponsive. At that, her baby panics a bit, a look of anguish sweeping over his face. The mother shows no emotion, makes no response to his distress. She has gone stone cold. Her baby starts to whimper. Psychologists call this scenario still face, and they use it intentionally to explore the foundations of resilience, the ability to recover from distress. Even after the still-face mother returns to her well-connected manner, babies continue to show distress for a while. How quickly they recover indicates how well they have mastered the rudiments of emotional self-management. During the course of the first year or two of life, that basic skill builds, as babies practice over and over going from upset to calm, from out of sync to looping. When a mother's face goes blank and she seems suddenly withdrawn, this invariably provokes the baby to make repair attempts to get his mother to respond. Babies signal their mother in every way they know, from flirting to crying. Some eventually give up, looking away and sucking their thumb to try to soothe themselves. In the view of Edward Tronick, the psychologist who invented the still face method, the more successfully infants solicit repairs of that broken loop, the better at it they become. From this emerges another strength. Such babies come to see human interactions as reparable. They believe that they have the capacity to set things right when something has gone out of sync with another person. So, they begin to build the scaffolding for a resilient lifelong sense of themselves and their relationships. Such children grow up seeing themselves as effective, as able to have positive interactions and to repair them if they go off track. They assume other people will be trustworthy and reliable partners. 6-month-old babies have already started developing a typical style of interacting with other people and a habitual way of thinking about themselves and others. What makes this vital learning possible is that sense of safety and trust, in other words, rapport, developed with the person who is providing the guidance. This I-you relationship makes all the difference in a child's social growth. Mother-infant synchrony operates from a child's first day of life. The more synchrony, the warmer and the happier are their overall interactions. Being out of sync, however, makes newborns angry, frustrated, or bored. If a baby gets a constant diet of dyssynchrony and solitary misery, he will learn to rely on whatever strategy for calming down he has stumbled upon. Some, seemingly giving up hope of outside help, focus on finding ways to make themselves feel better. Others distance themselves by turning away or avoiding eye contact, and so they create the space to calm down on their own. But this distancing strategy can distort an infant's ability to interact with other people. As his style becomes habitual, he can come to see himself as ineffective in interactions and to see other people as unreliable sources of comfort. In the adult version of this attitude, countless people, when feeling down, turn to solitary consolations like overeating, drinking, or compulsive channel surfing. As time goes on and the child grows up, he may deploy such strategies automatically and inflexibly, no matter what the situation may be, constructing a defense against anticipated bad experiences, whether that anticipation has a solid basis or not. So, instead of approaching people with an open, positive attitude, the child may reflexively withdraw into a protective shell, seeming cold and distant. The depressed loop. An Italian mother sings a happy ditty to Fabiana, her baby. Clap, clap your little hands, Daddy will be here soon. He'll bring you sweet candies, Fabiana, you'll eat them up. Her tone is joyful, the tune an upbeat allegro, and Fabiana delightedly joins in on the beat with coos. But when another mother sings the same ditty to her baby, this time in a monotonous low-pitched largo, her baby responds with signs of distress, not delight. The difference? The second mother suffers from clinical depression. The first mother does not. This simple discrepancy in how mothers sing to their babies bespeaks a vast difference in the emotional surround that their babies feel as they grow up, and in how they will feel in every other major relationship they have throughout life. Depressed mothers understandably find it difficult to engage their babies in happy proto-conversation. They lack the energy for the lilting tones of motherese. In their interactions with their babies, depressed mothers tend to be poorly timed and off, or intrusive, angry, or sad. The failure to synchronize disables looping, while the negative emotion sends the message that the baby has done something wrong and needs to change somehow. That message in turn upsets the baby, who can neither get his mother to help calm him down nor effectively do so himself. With this, the mother and her infant can all too easily fall into a downward spiral of miscoordination, negativity, and messages ignored. Depression, behavior geneticists tell us, can be inherited. Much research has tried to calculate the heritability of depression, the odds that such a child will herself become clinically depressed at some point in her life. But as Michael Meany points out, children born with a parent prone to bouts of depression inherit not only that parent's genes, but also the depressed parent, who may well act in ways that foster that gene's expression. For instance, studies of clinically depressed mothers and their infants reveal that depressed mothers tend to look away from their babies more than others, become angry more often, are more intrusive when their babies need a recovery timeout, and are less warm. Their babies typically make the only protest they know, crying, or seem to give up, becoming apathetic or withdrawn. A given baby's typical response may vary. If the mother tends toward anger, the baby becomes angry too. If the mother tends to be passively withdrawn, so her baby becomes. Babies seem to learn these interaction styles from the ongoing series of out-of-sync moments with their depressed mother. Moreover, they are at risk for acquiring a faulty sense of themselves, having learned already that they cannot bring about a repair when they are unhappy and out of sync, or rely on others to help them feel better. A mother's depression can become the transmission route by which all the personal and social ills bearing down on her affect her child. A mother's funk, for example, has negative hormonal effects on a child that show up as early as infancy. Babies of depressed mothers have higher levels of stress hormones and lower levels of dopamine and serotonin, a chemical profile linked to depression. A toddler may be unaware of the larger forces impinging on her family, but those forces will become embedded in her nervous system nonetheless. Social epigenetics offers hope to such children. Parents who are somewhat depressed but can manage to show good cheer in the face of difficulty seem to minimize the social transmission of depression, and having additional caretakers who are not depressed offers a reliably secure base. Some children of depressed mothers learn another lesson, one that has adaptive qualities. Many of these children become exquisite readers of their mother's shifting emotions, and as adults are artful at handling their interactions to keep them as pleasant, or minimally upsetting, as possible. Taken into the larger world, those skills can translate into a hard-earned social intelligence. The warping of empathy. Johnny let his best friend use his new ball, but his friend wasn't careful and lost the ball, and he wouldn't give Johnny another one. Johnny's friend, who he really liked to play with, moved away. Johnny couldn't play with his friend anymore. Both of these small melodramas capture moments of high emotion in any young child's life. But just what emotion do they reflect? Most children learn to distinguish one feeling from another and to grasp what has led to this feeling or that. But children who are severely neglected by their parents do not. When these vignettes were read to such preschoolers, the answers they gave were wrong half the time, a far poorer rate of recognition than for preschoolers who had been well nurtured. To the degree a child has been deprived of the very interactions that teach this lesson, his ability to read emotions in life's events will suffer. Children deprived of vital human contact fail to make crucial distinctions among emotions. Their sense of what others feel remains fuzzy. When preschoolers who had been abused, whose caregivers had repeatedly injured or inflicted physical pain on them, were read the two vignettes about Johnny, they read anger where none existed. Abused children perceive anger in faces that are neutral, ambiguous, or even sad. That overperception of anger suggests a hypersensitized amygdala. This heightened sensitivity seems selective for anger. When abused children look at faces that show anger, their brains react with stronger activation than do those of other children, though their brains respond normally to faces showing joy or fear. This warp in empathy means that the least sign that someone may be angry captures the attention of abused children. They scan for anger more than other kids do, see it when it is in fact not there, and keep looking at such signs longer. Detecting anger where it does not exist may have crucial benefits for such children. After all, at home, they face real danger, so their hypersensitivity makes sense as protective radar. Trouble brews when these children bring that heightened sensitivity with them into the world outside home. Schoolyard bullies, who typically have a history of physical abuse, overinterpret anger, reading antagonism into faces that are neutral. Their attacks on other children are often due to their misperceiving hostile intent where there is none. Handling a child's angry outbursts poses any parent a great challenge and an opportunity. Ideally, the parent will not let herself become angry in return, nor simply be passive, abandoning the child to his peak. Instead, when a parent manages her own anger, neither pushing it away nor indulging in it, while staying looped, she offers the child a safe container for learning to handle his own irritations. This does not mean, of course, that the child's emotional surroundings must always be tranquil, just that there should be enough resilience in the family system to recover from upsets. The family surround creates a young child's emotional reality. A cocoon of safety that stays intact can buffer a child even against the most terrible events. What kids are most concerned about in any major crisis comes down to, how does this affect my family? For example, children living in a war zone will skirt later trauma symptoms or heightened anxiety if their parents manage to create a stable, reassuring environment from day to day. This does not mean that parents should suppress their distress to protect the kids. Stanford University psychiatrist David Spiegel studied the emotional reactions in families after 9/11. Children, Spiegel notes, are hyper-aware of the emotional currents within their family. As he explains, the emotional cocoon works not when parents pretend nothing has happened, but when they let children know we're dealing with how upset we are as a family together. The reparative experience. His father was prone to violent rages, especially when drunk, which was just about every night. In those fits of anger, his father would grab one of his 4 sons and deliver a beating. Years later, he confided to his wife the fears he still carried. As he all too vividly recalled, whenever I saw my father's eyes narrow, we kids knew it was time to get out of the room. His wife, telling me about that confession, added a more subtle lesson for her. I realized my husband wasn't paid attention to as a child, so even when I'm hearing the same old story over and over, I remind myself, stay here. If he sees my attention flicker for a second, he gets hurt, she adds. He's hypersensitive to the moments when I start to tune out. Even when I still seem to be listening, he knows the instant I go away inside. Anyone who in childhood was treated by caretakers as an it rather than as a you is likely to bear such sensitivities and emotional wounds. Those tender spots emerge most often in close relationships, with a spouse, children, and good friends. But in adulthood, close relationships can offer a healing scenario. The person, instead of being ignored or worse, is treated as a you, as was that hypersensitive husband and his assiduously attuned wife. Like a nourishing parent or spouse, a good psychotherapist becomes a safe base for such neglected people. UCLA psychologist Alan Shore has become a heroic figure among many psychotherapists for his massive reviews of neuroscience that center on the patient-therapist relationship. Shore's theory holds that the neural site for emotional malfunction is primarily in the orbitofrontal cortex, OFC, that keystone in the brain's relationship pathways. The very growth of the OFC, he argues, depends on a child's experience. If parents offer attunement and a secure base, the OFC flourishes. If they are unresponsive or abusive, its development goes awry, resulting in a limited ability to regulate the length, intensity, or frequency of distressing emotions like anger, terror, or shame. Shore's theory highlights how our interactions play a role in reshaping our brain through neuroplasticity, the way repeated experiences sculpt the shape, size, and number of neurons and their synaptic connections. Some most potent shaping occurs in our key relationships, by repeatedly driving our brain into a given register. In effect, being chronically hurt and angered or emotionally nourished by someone we spend time with daily over the course of years can refashion the circuitry of our brain. Shore argues that nurturing relationships later in life can to some extent rewrite the neural scripts that were encrypted in the brain during childhood. In psychotherapy, the active ingredients in this emotional repair work include rapport and trust, with patient and therapist looping well. The therapist, Shore says, serves as a projection screen for reliving early relationships. But this time, the patient can live those relationships more fully and openly, without judgment, blame, betrayal, or neglect. Where a father was distant, the therapist can be available. Where a mother was hypercritical, the therapist can be accepting, so offering a reparative experience that may have been yearned for but never achieved. One mark of effective psychotherapy is the opening up of a freer emotional flow between therapist and client, who learns to loop without dreading or blocking distressing feelings. The best therapists create a secure emotional atmosphere, a safe container for whatever feelings the client may need to feel and express. The very act of looping with the therapist, then passing feelings back and forth, helps the client learn to handle those same emotions on her own. Just as children learn how to manage their own feelings in the safety of a secure base, psychotherapists provide adults a chance to finish the job. Similar reparative effects can result with a romantic partner or a good friend who offers these nurturing human qualities. If effective, therapy, or other reparative relationships in life, can enrich the capacity for connection, which in itself has healing properties. Chapter 12. The Set Point for Happiness. A 3-year-old in an ornery mood comes upon her visiting uncle, who is a handy target for her grumpiness. "I hate you," she declares. "Well, I love you," he smiles back, bemused. "I hate you," she replies more loudly, adamant. "I still love you," he says more sweetly. "I hate you," she yells with dramatic gusto. "Well, I still love you," he reassures her, sweeping her up in his arms. "I love you," she concedes softly, melting into his hug. Developmental psychologists view such pithy interactions in terms of the underlying emotional communication. The I hate you, I love you disconnect is, in this view, an interaction error, and getting back on the same emotional wavelength is repair of that error. A successful repair, like the final rapport achieved between this 3-year-old and her uncle, makes both partners feel good. Continued disrepair has the opposite effect. A child's ability to repair such a disconnection, to weather an interpersonal emotional storm and then reconnect again, is one key to lifelong happiness. The secret lies not in avoiding life's inevitable frustrations and upsets, but in learning to recover from them. The faster the recovery, the greater the child's capacity for joyfulness. That capacity, as with so many others in social life, begins in infancy. When a baby and his caregiver are in sync, each reciprocates the other's messages in a coordinated way. But during the first year of life, babies lack much of the neural wiring necessary to carry off such coordination. They stay well coordinated only about 30% of the time or less, with a natural cycle of going from in sync to out of sync. Being out of sync makes babies unhappy. They protest via signs of frustration, in effect, asking for help getting back in sync. This betokens their first attempts at interaction repair. Mastery of these essential human skills seems to begin in those small shifts from out-of-sync misery to in-sync calm. Everyone in a child's day offers a model, for better or for worse, of how to handle distress. This learning goes on implicitly, probably via mirror neurons, as a child witnesses how an older sibling, a playmate, or a parent manages their own emotional storms. Through such passive learning, the OFC's regulatory circuits for calming the amygdala rehearse whatever strategy the child witnesses. A bit of this learning also goes on explicitly whenever someone reminds or helps a child to manage her own rocky feelings. With time and practice, the OFC circuitry for regulating emotional impulses gradually strengthens. Children learn not only to calm down or resist emotional impulses, but also to strengthen their repertoire of ways to affect others. This lays the foundation for becoming an adult who can react the way that 3-year-old's uncle did when he lovingly melted away her grumpiness, rather than stiffening and warning, "Don't you dare speak to me that way." By age 4 or 5, children are able to shift from simply trying to control their upsetting emotions to having a greater understanding of what causes their distress and what to do to relieve it, a sign of high-road maturation. Parental coaching in the first 4 years of life, some psychologists suspect, may be particularly potent in shaping a child's later abilities to manage her emotions well and to handle rocky encounters smoothly. To be sure, adults do not always offer the best models. In one study, parents of preschoolers were observed during a marital disagreement. Some couples were antagonistic and disjointed in their attempts to resolve their conflicts. Neither party listened to the other. They were angry and contemptuous, and they often withdrew from each other as their hostility grew. The children of these couples imitated this pattern with their playmates, being demanding and angry, bullying and hostile. In contrast, those couples who during their disagreements displayed more warmth, empathy, and mutual understanding also approached parenting together with greater harmony, even playfulness, and these parents had children who in turn got along better with playmates and could work disagreements out more productively. How couples work out their disagreements predicts their children's conduct, even years later. If all goes well, the result will be a child who is resilient in the face of stress and able to recover from distress and to attune effectively. It takes a socially intelligent family to help build what developmental psychologists call a positive affective core. In other words, a happy child. 4 ways to say no. A 14-month-old boy, so typically for that mischievous age, gets into a dangerous fix as he tries to climb onto a table where a lamp perches precariously. Consider several possible ways a parent could respond. Give a firm no, and then tell him climbing is for outdoors, and take him there to find a place to do so. Ignore the boy's climbing, only to hear the crash of the falling lamp, pick it up, and quietly tell him not to do that again, and then pay no attention to him. Shout an angry no, but feel guilty about reacting too harshly, give him a reassuring hug, then leave him alone because he has been such a disappointment. These parental reactions, implausible as some may seem, all represent discipline styles that appear repeatedly in observations of parents and children. Daniel Siegel, the UCLA child psychiatrist who offers the scenarios, has emerged as one of the most influential contemporary thinkers in psychotherapy and child development. Siegel argues that each of these types of parental reaction shapes centers in the social brain in unique ways. One moment for such shaping comes when a child confronts something upsetting or confusing, and she looks to her parents, reading not just what they say, but their entire demeanor to learn how to feel and respond. The messages parents send at such teachable moments slowly build the child's sense of herself and how to relate to and what to expect from the people around her. Take the parent who told the climbing boy no, then took him outside to redirect his energies. In the view of Siegel's colleague, Alan Shore, that interaction optimally affects the boy's orbitofrontal cortex, strengthening the OFC's emotional brake. Here, that neuronal array tones down the youngster's initial excitement, helping him learn how to better manage his impulsivity. Once the child applies these neural brakes, the parent teaches that a more appropriate excitement can continue. He can climb a jungle gym, but not a table. What the boy learns, in essence, comes down to, my parents don't always like what I do, but if I stop and find something better, everything will be okay. This approach, in which the parent sets a boundary and then finds a better outlet for the child's energy, typifies the discipline style that results in secure attachment. Securely attached children experience attunement from their parents, even when they've been naughty. The terrible twos, when babies start to defy their parents by shouting no when they are told to do something, signals a major milestone in brain development. The brain is beginning to be able to inhibit impulse, to say no to urges, a capacity that becomes refined throughout childhood and the teen years. Apes and very young children alike have great trouble with this aspect of social life for the same neural reason. The array of neurons in their OFC that can stop an impulse from being enacted is underdeveloped. Over the course of childhood, the OFC will gradually mature anatomically. A neural growth spurt starts at around age 5, allowing more of this circuitry to come online just in time to send the child off to school. That spurt continues apace to around age 7, greatly boosting the child's self-control and making second-grade classrooms far less rambunctious than kindergarten. Each stage of intellectual, social, and emotional development in a growing child marks a similar step in the maturation of brain areas. This anatomical process continues into the mid-20s. What happens in a child's brain when parents consistently fail to attune well depends on the precise nature of that failure. Daniel Siegel describes ways parents can fall short and the resulting difficulties that children are likely to endure. Take the parent who responded to the table-climbing toddler by ignoring him. That response typifies a parent-child relationship where attunement of any kind occurs rarely, and the parents are emotionally uninvolved with the child. Such children encounter only frustration in trying to get empathic attention from their parents. The absence of looping, and hence shared moments of pleasure or joy, increases the odds that a child will grow up with a diminished capacity for positive emotions and, in later life, will find it difficult to reach out to other people. Children of such avoidant parents grow up skittish. As adults, their expression of emotions is inhibited, particularly those emotions that would help them bond with a partner. In keeping with the model their parents displayed, they avoid not just expressing their feelings, but also emotionally intimate relationships. The third parent reacted to the table climbing first by becoming angry, then by feeling guilty, then by being disappointed with the boy. Siegel fittingly describes such parents as ambivalent. They may on occasion be warm and caring, but more often they send signals to the child of disapproval or rejection, facial expressions of disgust or contempt, averting their gaze, body language signifying anger or disconnection. This emotional stance can leave the child repeatedly feeling hurt and humiliated. Children often respond to such parenting with uncontrollable emotional swings, their impulses unchecked or running amok, like the classic bad boy who always gets into trouble. Siegel suggests that underlying such out-of-control behavior is a child's brain that has failed to master how to say no to impulse, a task of the OFC. But sometimes the sense of not being cared about, or of whatever I do, it's wrong, leaves a child despairing, though still yearning for positive parental attention. Such children come to regard themselves as basically flawed. In adulthood, they tend to bring to their close relationships this same ambivalent combination of yearning for affection with an intense fear that they will not get it, and an even deeper fear of being abandoned altogether. The work of play. Even now, in middle age, Poet Emily Fox Gordon vividly remembers being wildly, uncontrollably happy as a young girl growing up with loving parents in a small New England village. The whole town seemed to embrace Emily and her brother as they zipped down the streets on their bikes. The elms stood guard, the local dogs greeted us, and even the telephone operators knew us by name. Traipsing freely through backyard gardens, racing around the local college campus, she felt as though she were wandering a gentle Eden. When a child feels well loved and cared for, worthy in the eyes of especially important figures in her life, the resulting well-being creates a reservoir of positivity. That in turn seems to fuel another basic impulse, the urge to explore the world at large. Children need more than a secure base, a relationship where they can be soothed. Mary Ainsworth, Bowlby's chief American disciple, proposed they also need a safe haven, an emotionally secure place like their room or home to return to after going out and exploring the wider world. That exploration can be physical, as in riding a bike around the neighborhood, interpersonal, as in meeting new people and making friends, or even intellectual, as in pursuing a wide-ranging curiosity. A simple sign that a child feels he has a safe haven is going out to play. Playful fun has serious benefits. Through years of hard play, children acquire a range of social expertise. For one, they learn social savvy, like how to negotiate power struggles, how to cooperate and form alliances, and how to concede with grace. All that practice can go on while playing with a relaxed sense of safety. Even a mistake can trigger giggles, while in a schoolroom the same mistake might draw ridicule. Play offers children a secure space to try out something new in their repertoire with minimum anxiety. Exactly why playing is so much fun has become clear with the discovery that the brain circuitry that primes play also arouses joy. Identical circuitry for playfulness can be found in all mammals, including the ubiquitous laboratory mouse. This tract hides in the most ancient neural zones down in the brainstem, a pocket near the spine that governs reflexes and our most primordial responses. The scientist who has studied the neural circuitry of play in greatest detail may be Jaak Panksepp at Ohio's Bowling Green State University. In his masterwork, Affective Neuroscience, Panksepp explores the neural source of all the major human drives, including playfulness, which he sees as the brain's source of joy. The primal subcortical circuitry that prompts the young of all mammals to romp in rough-and-tumble play, Panksepp says, seems to have a vital role in a child's neural growth. And the emotional fuel for all that developmental work seems to be delight itself. In research with rodents in the lab, Panksepp's group has discovered that play offers another arena for social epigenetics, fertilizing the growth of circuitry in the amygdala and frontal cortex. His work has identified a specific compound generated during play that drives genetic transcription in these fast-developing areas of a youngster's social brain. His findings, which likely extend to other mammals like humans that share the same neural landscape, add new significance to that young child's universal yearning, I want to play. Playing can go on most readily when a child feels she has a safe haven and can relax, sensing the comfort of a trusted caregiver's presence. Just knowing that mommy or that nice babysitter is somewhere in the house gives a child enough security to lose herself in another world, one of her own invention. A child's play both demands and creates its own safe space, one in which she can confront threats, fears, and dangers, but always come through whole. In this sense, play can be therapeutic. In play, everything that goes on gets suspended in an as-if reality. For example, play offers children a natural way to manage feared separations or abandonments, rendering them instead opportunities for mastery and self-discovery. Likewise, without fear or inhibition, they can face desires and impulses that are too dangerous to enact in reality. A clue to why we want a play mate, why being two makes playing more joyful, lies in our wiring for being tickled. All mammals have tickle skin, peppered with specialized receptors that transmit the brain messages for a playful mood. Tickling triggers the belly laugh, which has circuitry distinct from that for smiling. The human belly laugh, like play itself, has approximations in many mammals, which is always elicited by tickling. In fact, Panksepp discovered that, like human toddlers, Baby rats are drawn to adults who will tickle them. The tickled rat utters a chirp of delight that seems to be an evolutionary cousin of the rapturous laugh of a tickled 3-year-old child. In rats, it's a high-frequency chirping at about 50 kilohertz, out of range of the human ear. In humans, the tickle zone runs from the back of the neck around the rib cage, the easiest patch of skin to launch a youngster into uncontrolled gales of laughter. But triggering that reflex demands another person. The reason we can't tickle ourselves seems to be that the neurons for tickling are tuned to react to unpredictability, which is why simply wiggling a finger at a youngster along with a threatening coochie coochie coo will set off wild laughter, the primal joke. The circuitry for playful joy has close ties to the neural networks that make a ticklish child laugh. And so our brain comes hardwired with an urge to play, one that hurls us into sociability. Panksepp's research raises an intriguing question. What do you call a child who exhibits hyperactivity, impulsivity, and unfocused rapid shifting from one activity to another? Some might see these shifts as indicators of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, which has reached epidemic proportions among school children, at least in the United States. But Panksepp, extrapolating to humans from his work with rodents, sees the shifts instead as signs of an active neural system for play. He notes that the psychostimulant medications given to children for ADHD all reduce the activity of the brain's play modules when given to animals, just as they seem to snuff out playfulness in children. He makes a radical, though untested, proposal. Let younger children vent their urge to play in an early morning free play rough and tumble recess. Then bring them into a classroom after their urge to play has been sated, when they can more easily pay attention. Come to think of it, that's just what used to happen in my grammar school, long before anyone ever heard of ADHD. At the brain level, time spent playing pays off in neuronal and synaptic growth. All that practice strengthens brain pathways. Beyond that, playfulness throws off a kind of charisma. Adults, children, and even lab rats are drawn to spend more time with those who have had abundant practice playing. Some primitive roots of social intelligence surely trace to this low-road circuitry. In the interplay of the brain's myriad control systems, the play circuitry defers to bad feelings, anxiety, anger, and sadness, all of which suppresses playfulness. Indeed, the urge to play does not emerge until a child feels protected, comfortable with newly encountered playmates, familiar with a strange playground. That same inhibition of playfulness by anxiety shows up in all mammals, reflecting a basic neural design that no doubt has survival value. As a child matures, the circuitry for emotional control will slowly suppress the effervescent urge to giggle and romp. As the regulatory circuits of the prefrontal cortex develop in late childhood and the early teens, children are more able to meet the social demands to get serious. Slowly, these energies are channeled into more grown-up modes of pleasure, as child's play becomes mere memory. The capacity for joy. When it comes to the capacity for joy, Richard Davidson nears the upper limits. Without question, he's just about the most upbeat person I know. Davidson and I were graduate students together years ago, and he has had an outstanding research career. When I became a science journalist, I got in the habit of consulting him for explanations of new, and for me, puzzling findings in neuroscience. Just as I found his research pivotal when I was writing Emotional Intelligence, I drew on his work again in my exploration of social neuroscience. For instance, his lab discovered that the more the orbitofrontal cortex activates as a mother gazes at a picture of her newborn, the stronger her feelings of love and warmth. As a founder of the field of affective neuroscience, the study of emotions in the brain, Davidson's research has mapped the neural centers that give each of us a unique emotional set point. This neural pivot point fixes the range that our emotions typically swing through during any given day. That set point, whether dour or upbeat, has remarkable stability. Research studies have found, for instance, that the elation people feel after winning a huge amount of money in a lottery settles back in about a year to the range of mood they felt before winning. The same holds true for people who become paralyzed in an accident. A year or so after the initial agony, most return to the same daily moods they had before the accident. When people are in the grip of distressing emotion, Davidson has found the two brain areas most active are the amygdala and the right prefrontal cortex. When we're feeling cheery, those areas are quiet, while part of the left prefrontal cortex lights up. Activity in the prefrontal area alone tracks our moods. The right side activates when we are upset, the left when we are in good spirits. But even when we are in a neutral mood, the ratio of background activity in our right and left prefrontal areas is a remarkably accurate gauge of the range of emotions we typically experience. People with more left side activity are particularly prone to down or upsetting moments, while those with more activity on the right generally have happier days. The good news here, our emotional thermostat does not seem to be fixed at birth. To be sure, each of us has an innate temperament that makes us more or less prone to happy or dour days. But even given that baseline, research links the kind of care we get as children to our brain's capacity for joy in adulthood. Happiness thrives with resilience, the ability to overcome upsets and return to a calmer, happier state. There seems to be a direct link between stress resilience and that capacity for happiness. A great deal of animal data, Davidson observes, shows that nurturing parents, a rodent mother who grooms and licks, for example, promote happiness and resilience under stress in their young. In animals and humans alike, one index of positive affect is a youngster's capacity for exploration and sociability, especially under stress like that of an unfamiliar setting. Novelty can be appraised as a threat or as an opportunity. Animals who had more nurturing in their upbringing will view a strange place as an opportunity. They'll explore it more freely and be more outgoing. That finding in animals fits a discovery Davidson made in studies of humans, specifically adults in their late 50s, who had been assessed every few years since their high school graduation. Those with the most resilience and the best daily moods showed a revealing pattern of brain activity when Davidson's group measured their happiness set point. Intriguingly, those adults who recalled being most well-nurtured as children tended to have the more joyous pattern. Were those warm memories of childhood just created by the rosy lens on life that good moods provide? Perhaps. But as Davidson told me, the amount of joy in a toddler's relationships appears critical to setting the brain pathways for happiness. Resilience. A wealthy New York couple of my acquaintance had a daughter late in life. These middle-aged parents dote on her. They have hired a team of nannies to give her constant attention, and they have bought her what looks like an entire store's worth of toys. But despite her castle-like dollhouse, jungle gym, and rooms packed with playthings, it all seems a bit forlorn. This 4-year-old has never had a friend over to play. Why? Her parents are afraid that another child might do something that would upset her. The couple subscribes to the misguided theory that if their child can avoid all stressful situations, she will develop into a happier person. That notion misreads the data on resilience and happiness. Such overprotection is in fact a form of deprivation. The idea that a child should avoid misery at all costs distorts both the reality of life and the ways children learn to find happiness. More important for a child than seeking some elusive perpetual happiness, researchers find, is learning how to de-escalate emotional storms. The goal for parenting should not be achieving a brittle, positive psychology, clinging to a state of perpetual joy in one's children, but rather teaching a child how to return on her own to a state of contentment, whatever may happen. For instance, parents who can reframe an upsetting moment, the wisdom in the old saying, "No use crying over spilt milk," teach their children a universal method for undoing distressing emotions. Such small interventions instill in a child's repertoire for managing bad times the ability to look on the bright side. At the neural level, these lessons become ingrained in the OFC circuitry for managing distress. If we fail to learn in childhood how to handle the full catastrophe of a rich life, we grow up emotionally ill-prepared. Learning to build these inner resources for a happier life demands that we endure the hard knocks at the playground, boot camp for the inevitable upsets of everyday relationships. Given how the brain masters social resilience, children need to rehearse for the ups and downs of social life, not experience a steady monotone of delight. When a child gets upset, the value lies in attaining some mastery over that reaction. A child's success or failure in this essential lesson will be reflected in his stress hormone levels. In the beginning weeks of the school year, for example, preschoolers who are most outgoing, socially competent, and well-liked show high activity in the brain circuit that triggers stress hormones. This reflects their physiological effort to meet the challenge of entering a new social group, their playmates. But for these more socially adept preschoolers, stress hormone levels decline as the year goes on, as they find a comfortable niche in this small community. In contrast, those preschoolers who remain unhappy and socially isolated as the year continues maintain high stress hormone levels or even increase them as the year wears on. The first-week jitters rise in stress hormone activity is a helpful metabolic response, mobilizing the body to handle a dicey situation. The biological cycle of arousal and return to normal as a challenge becomes mastered etches the sine wave for resilience. By contrast, children who are slow to develop distress mastery show a very different pattern. Their biology seems inflexible, their arousal levels stuck in too high a gear. Just scary enough. When she was 2, one of my granddaughters went through several months of being fascinated by the cartoon movie Chicken Run, a somewhat dark comedy about poultry trying to escape a farm where they are doomed to be slaughtered. Parts of the cartoon have the grim tone of a prison movie rather than the lightness of a children's cartoon. Some of the scary scenes arouse outright fear and terror in a 2-year-old. Yet, for a long while, my granddaughter insisted on seeing that movie over and over, week after week. She freely admitted she found Chicken Run really scary, yet, in the next breath, she would add that it was her favorite movie. Why should a movie so scary exert such an inexorable pull on her? The answer may well lie in her neural learning as she repeatedly watched those frightening scenes, a delicious mix of still being a bit frightened, yet knowing it would end up all right. Some of the most convincing neuroscience data for the benefits of getting just scared enough comes from studies of squirrel monkeys. When they were but 17 weeks old, the monkey equivalent of young childhood, the monkeys were taken from their cozy cage once a week for 10 weeks. They were put for an hour in another cage with adult monkeys they did not know, terrifying for squirrel monkey youngsters, as ample signs testified. Then, when they had just been weaned but were still emotionally dependent on their moms, the same monkeys were placed with their mothers in a strange cage. This cage had no other monkeys but offered abundant treats and many places to explore. Those monkeys who had earlier been exposed to the stressful cages proved far braver and more curious than others their age who had never left their mother's side. They explored the new cages freely and treated themselves to the snacks there. Those who had never left the safe haven of their mothers just clung timidly to her. Significantly, the independent youngsters showed no biological signs of fear arousal, although they had done so amply as youngsters while in the strange cage. The regular visits to a scary place acted as an inoculation against stress. Such doses of stress, if given in the right range, seem to give the developing brain an opportunity to master threats and find ways to calm down. In humans, as well as monkeys, neuroscientists conclude if youngsters are exposed to stresses they learn to handle, this mastery becomes imprinted in their neural circuitry, leaving them more resilient when facing stress as adults. Repeating that sequence of fear turning into calm apparently shapes the neural circuitry for resilience, building an essential emotional capacity. As Richard Davidson explains, we can learn to be resilient by being exposed to a threat or stress at a level that allows us to manage it. If we are exposed to too little stress, nothing will be learned. Too much, and the wrong lesson might become embedded in the neural circuitry for fear. One sign that a scary movie is too overwhelming for a child can be seen in how quickly he recovers physiologically. If his brain and body stay stuck in the fear arousal mode for a distressingly prolonged period, then what's being rehearsed is not resilience but the failure to recover. But when the threats a child confronts are within an optimal range, where the brain temporarily mounts a full fear response but then returns to calm, we can assume that a different neural sequence has unfolded. This may well explain my 2-year-old granddaughter's pleasure in that scary movie, and it may be why so many people, particularly preteens and teenagers, adore movies that scare them. Depending on the age and the child, even mildly scary fare can be too much. The old Disney classic Bambi, in which a doe's mother dies, was in its day traumatic for many of the children who flocked to see it. A toddler, of course, should not watch a terror-stirring movie of the Nightmare on Elm variety, but the same movie might give a teenager's brain lessons in resiliency. While the toddler would be overwhelmed, the teen might enjoy a yeasty mix of peril and pleasure. If a too horrific movie haunts a child for months with nightmares and daytime fearfulness, then the brain has failed to master fear. Instead, it merely primes and perhaps subtly strengthens the fear response itself. Researchers suspect that for children who suffered repeatedly from overwhelming stress, not the on-screen variety but the much scarier raw reality of disturbingly turbulent family life, this very neural path may lead in some cases to depression or anxiety disorders in later life. The social brain learns well by imitating models, like a parent who calmly watches what otherwise seems so menacing. When my granddaughter would get to a particularly frightening moment in the movie and hear from her mommy the comforting words, "It will be okay," or get the same message tacitly by feeling the reassuring presence of her daddy as she sat in his lap, she felt secure and in control of her feelings, a sense that she can deploy in other trying times. Such basic lessons in childhood will leave their mark through life, not just in a basic stance toward the social world, but in one's ability to navigate the whirlpools of adult love. And love, in turn, fosters its own lasting biological imprints. Part 4. Love's Varieties. Chapter 13. Webs of Attachment. In the terrain of the human heart, scientists tell us, at least 3 independent but interrelated brain systems are at play, all moving us in their own way. To untangle love's mysteries, neuroscience distinguishes between neural networks for attachment, for caregiving, and for sex. Each is fueled by a differing set of brain chemicals and hormones, and each runs through a disparate neuronal circuit. Each adds its own chemical spice to the many varieties of love. Attachment determines who we turn to for succor. These are the people we miss the most when they are absent. Caregiving gives us the urge to nurture the people for whom we feel most concern. When we are attached, we cling. When we are caregiving, we provide. And sex is, well, sex. The 3 intermingle in an elegant balance, an interplay that, when all goes well, furthers nature's design for continuing the species. After all, sex alone merely begins the job. Attachment provides the glue that keeps not just a couple but a family together, and caregiving adds the impulse to look after offspring so our children can grow up to have their own. Each of these 3 strands of affection connects people in different ways. When attachment entwines with caring and sexual attraction, we can savor full-blown romance. But when any of these 3 goes missing, romantic love stumbles. This underlying neural wiring interacts in differing combinations in love's many varieties, romantic, familial, and parental, as well as in our capacities for connecting, whether in friendship, with compassion, or just doting on a cat. By extension, the same circuits may be at work to one extent or another in larger realms like spiritual longing or an affinity for open skies and empty beaches. Many pathways for love travel the low road. Someone who fit the narrow definition of social intelligence as based on cognition alone would be clueless here. The forces of affection that bind us to each other preceded the rise of the rational brain. Love's many reasons have always been subcortical, though love's execution may require careful plotting, and so loving well requires a full social intelligence, the low road married to the high. One or the other alone will not be enough to forge strong, satisfying bonds. Untangling the complex neural web for affection may lay bare some of our own confusions and problems. The 3 major systems for loving, attachment, caregiving, and sexuality, all follow their own complex rules. At a given moment, any of these 3 can be ascendant, say as a couple feels a warm togetherness, or when they cuddle their baby, or while they make love. When all 3 of these love systems are operating, they feed romance at its richest, a relaxed, affectionate, and sensual connection where rapport blossoms. The first step in forming such a union involves the attachment system in its scouting mode. As we've seen, this system begins its operation in earliest infancy, guiding an infant to seek care and protection from others, most particularly from its mother or other caregivers. And there are fascinating parallels between how we form our first attachments in life and how we form our initial connection to a romantic partner. The art of the flirt. Friday night, and a horde of smartly dressed men and women are packed tightly into a bar on New York's Upper East Side. It's a singles event, and flirting is the order of the evening. A woman parades past the bar heading for the powder room, tossing her hair and swaying her hips. As she promenades past a man who has caught her interest, she lets her eyes meet his for just a moment, and then, as she sees him start to return her gaze, she quickly looks away. Her unstated message? Notice me. That inviting look, followed by coyness, imitates an approach withdrawal sequence found in most mammalian species where survival of newborns requires a father's help. The female needs to test a male's willingness to pursue and commit. Her flirtatious move is so universal in the art of flirting that ethologists have observed it even in rats. A female will repeatedly run toward and away from a male or dart past him, wiggling her head, all the while emitting the same high-pitched squeal that rat pups make while playing. The flirtatious smile is cataloged among Paul Ekman's 18 varieties. The flirter smiles while facing elsewhere, then gazes directly at the target of ardor just long enough to be noticed before quickly looking away. That coy tactic takes advantage of an ingenious neural circuit that almost seems to have been planted in the male brain just for that moment. A team of neuroscientists in London discovered that when a man receives the direct gaze of a woman he finds attractive, his brain activates a dopamine circuit that delivers a dollop of pleasure. Simply looking at beautiful women or making eye contact with someone not perceived as attractive fails to stir this circuitry. But whether or not men find a given woman appealing, flirting itself pays off. Men most frequently approach those women who flirt a lot, rather than more attractive women who don't flirt. Flirting goes on among people in cultures around the world, as one researcher documented from Samoa to Paris with a camera that takes pictures from its side. Flirting is the opening move in a continuing series of tacit negotiations at each step in courtship. The first strategic gambit involves casting a wide net by reckless broadcasting of one's readiness to engage. Very young infants do the same, promiscuously signaling their interest in interacting with just about any friendly person who happens by and lighting up to welcome whoever responds. The parallel in adult flirting includes not just that flirtatious smile, but making eye contact and talking animatedly in a high-pitched voice with exaggerated gestures, much like an infant on the prowl for friendly interaction. Next comes the talk. At least in American culture, this essential step in a budding courtship has an almost mythic quality, a conversation with the subtext of determining whether the prospective partner actually would be worth becoming attached to. This step gives the high road a central role in what has hitherto been largely a low-road process, something like a suspicious parent checking out a teenager's date. While the low road propels us into each other's arms, the high road sizes up a prospective partner, hence the importance of having conversation over coffee after last night's tryst. A prolonged courtship lets partners take the full measure of each other on what counts most to both, that a romantic partner be considerate and understanding, responsive and competent, that is, worthy of a more intense attachment. The stages of courtship are paced to give prospective partners a chance to guess whether the other person might be a good companion, a positive indicator that perhaps one day they would also be a good parent. So, during early conversations, partners gauge each other's warmth, responsiveness, and reciprocity, and they make a tentative choice. Similarly, infants at around 3 months become more selective in whom they seek to engage, focusing on the people with whom they feel most secure. Once a partner passes that test, synchrony marks the transition from attraction to feeling romantic longings. The increased ease of getting in sync, both for babies and for flirting adults, shows up in fond gazes, cuddling, and nuzzling, all reflecting an increase in intimacy. At this stage, lovers regress to outright babyishness, using baby talk or cute private names, soothing whispers, and gentle caressing. This utter physical ease with each other marks the point where each has become a secure base for the other. Still another echo of infancy. To be sure, courtship can be as stormy as a toddler in a tantrum. Infants, after all, are self-centered, as lovers can be, and this general template morphs to contain all the ways risk and anxiety can bring couples together, from wartime romances and illicit affairs to women who fall for dangerous men. Maybe that's why some find falling in love more akin to addiction than to the flirtations of infancy. Neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp theorizes that as a couple fall in love, they literally become addicted to each other. Panksepp finds a neural corollary between the dynamics of opiate addiction and our dependence on the people for whom we feel our strongest attachments. All positive interactions with people, he proposes, owe part of their pleasure to the opioid system, the very circuitry that links with heroin and other addictive substances. That circuitry, it turns out, includes those two key structures of the social brain, the orbitofrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. The OFC and the ACC activate in addicts while they are craving, intoxicated, and binging. When an addict goes through withdrawal from his addiction, these areas deactivate. This system accounts for the addict's overvaluing his favored drug, as well as the utter failure of any inhibition in seeking it out. All that may be true, too, with an object of ardor during the pangs of falling in love. Panksepp theorizes that the gratification that addicts get from their drugs biologically mimics the natural pleasure we get from feeling connected to those we love. The neural circuitry for both are largely shared. Even animals, he finds, prefer to spend time with those in whose presence they have secreted oxytocin and natural opioids, which induce a relaxed serenity, suggesting that these brain chemicals cement our family ties and friendships, as well as our love relationships.